Forcing them to take vaccine. All of that was spite. Enough is enough. The people. Hey! We all in on this. Enough is enough. This is it. Enough is enough. The people say they gone now. You want to hear that again? Enough is enough. The people say they gone now. Properly gone. What hidden in darkness must come out in light. Yes. Don't you be a coward. Just stand up and fight. Remember they fight the teachers like they have no right. Remember forcing them to take vaccine. All of that was spite. Enough is enough. The people. Hey, we all in on this. Enough is enough. This is it. Enough is enough. The people say they gone now. You want to hear that again? Enough is enough. The people say they gone now. Properly gone. What hidden in darkness must come out in light. Yes. Don't you be a coward. Just stand up and fight. Remember they fight the teachers like they have no right. Remember forcing them to take vaccine. All of that was spite. Enough is enough. The people. Hey, we all in on this. Enough is enough. This is it. Enough is enough. The people say they gone now. You want to hear that again? Enough is enough. The people say they gone now. Properly gone. What hidden in darkness must come out in light. Yes. Don't you be a coward. Just stand up and fight. Remember they fight the teachers like they have no right. Remember forcing them to take vaccine. All of that was spite. Enough is enough. The people. Hey, we all in on this. Enough is enough. This is it. Enough is enough. The people say they gone now.
And they gone for sure, gone for sure, gone for sure, say they gone for sure. They were gone for sure, gone for sure. Friday you see key and open up the door because the whole place. Not Leeward, Central Leeward, South Leeward. And they gone for sure, gone for sure, gone for sure, say they gone for sure. They were gone for sure, gone for sure. Friday you see key and open up the door because the whole place. Not Leeward, Central.
It is your right to vote. Your vote is secret. You have a right to vote without fear. No one will know how you vote. They have no way of knowing who you voted for. This election, when you go to vote, vote without fear. It is your right to vote. Your vote is secret. You have a right to vote without fear. No one will know how you vote. They have no way of knowing who you voted for. This election, when you go to vote, vote without fear.
Good night and welcome to another episode of NDP's Night Talks, where we are bringing to you a special mini-series that deals with voter awareness. And joining me this evening to continue that discussion going, we have none other than the president of the New Democratic Party, the Honorable Dr. Godwin Friday, and we also have former Senator and lawyer Zita Banwell joining us. Good evening, welcome, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to say good night to our viewing audience, starting with you, Doc.
Thank you very much, Daniel, but I'll let Zita go first.
You can make that call. I can't.
You can say the introduction first.
Well, certainly I'd like to say again, good evening to all viewers. It's a pleasure to bring this program alongside Dr. Friday today. Last week I did it with Louise, and we're just here to inform the public and to educate you on your voter rights.
Well, thank you very much again. It's good to be back here with you and to share this stage, so to speak, with my colleague, Zita Barnwell, and to thank her so much for being a part of this. Yes, we are here in this series of public education on the voting process and so forth and voting rights. And we will get into the discussion as we go on. Thank the listeners and the viewers who are participating here this evening.
And just to remind you that you can always send us your comments, your questions. We had a number of questions last time, so don't be afraid. If there's anything that you would like to know, you can send your questions through in the comment section. So first, I would like to begin by asking you, Dr. Friday, why do you think it is so important to educate people about their rights as voters and the voting process?
Well, the premise of your question is absolutely correct. For us in the New Democratic Party, we believe that voter education is extremely important. That is part of our civic duty, part of our responsibility as persons involved in the political process, to the extent that we can help people to understand what it entails and how to exercise the right. We believe that everyone who has the right to vote should feel confident in exercising that right, and that they must know how to go about doing so. As you know, voting is essential to any democracy, and everyone must be able to vote without fear and to be able to do so in accordance with their own conscience. And of course, when you have a well-educated, well-informed electorate or public, to me, I think this is one of the best antidotes to voter fraud and corruption in the electoral process. So I believe that the obligation for us in the political process is to ensure that the voters understand, how to exercise their right, and that they have a well-informed position. It's not just, however, a question of educating people about the provisions of the RPA and the practices of the electoral process. We also feel that part of the voter education, obviously, is to educate the public about what the New Democratic Party stands for, and that what we bring to the table and what we offer in any election, especially election coming up now, so that the voter will have a chance to decide that we are the best party in the elections coming up. So it is educating people about the process, what are their rights under the process, but also as to what the New Democratic Party stands for, what we have been advocating over the number of years, and what we will bring to governance in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I believe we're doing an effective job of getting that done.
Quite. So I would agree. Last week, as I said, people were very much engaged. And recently, there was a meeting with the supervisor of elections.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that meeting, why it was called, what was addressed?
Well, let's go back a bit. In February, I wrote to the supervisor of elections outlining several concerns that we had, and the supervisor wrote back to us in March, and we had still outstanding concerns that I wanted to have addressed. So I contacted her office, and my office contacted hers, and we arranged to have a meeting last Friday. She indicated that she wanted to have other stakeholders involved, that is to say the Christian Council, whom I copied in the original letter, and also the Unity Labour Party, whom I had also copied on my original letter to the supervisor of elections. And so we had this meeting last Friday, and the atmosphere, the approach on the part of the Office of the Supervisor of Election was very helpful and constructive, and gave us the opportunity to ask our questions and to raise our concerns. And some of those concerns, they really stemmed originally from the situation concerning voters from the Southern Grenadines, because there was quite a bit of talk about whether they, having been here for a number of months following Hurricane Beryl, that they would be permitted to register in the Southern Grenadines as first-time registrants. And there was pronouncement from the Office of the Supervisor of Election that having been here that they had to be in the Southern Grenadines for 6 months, they had to be resident there for 6 months in order to register there. We took exception to that interpretation because we felt it was not consistent with the law. So that was one of the issues that we wanted to address with her. Also, some of the matters that were raised in the letter had to do with the design of the ballot paper, specifically the perforation line that separates parts of the ballot paper to ensure that the heads of the ballots were not torn off improperly, as was done in the last election. We also spoke about the conduct of election officials and the process by which election officials were to be selected, and made our input with respect to that. We also spoke to her about the persons who have been displaced from Beryl. If elections, were called and they were still not able to go back home, how they would be facilitated to go back to the Southern Grenadines in particular in order to have the right to vote in their constituency. So those are some of the matters that we raised with the supervisor of elections. And some are still, the answers for which some of them are still outstanding. She said she would go back and come back to us once she had had clarity on them herself.
Okay, I'm sure some persons who join us later may be asking about some of those things specifically. Okay. So we may have to revisit.
No problem.
But Zita, you were with us last week and you did a fantastic job, by the way, of giving us all the education possible on the registration process, who is entitled to vote, etc. So for those who weren't with us last week or who joined us late, can you just walk us through that process again of exactly who is eligible to vote?
Thanks, Danielle. That's a pretty good question that I think we would usually have in this series, remind people who's eligible to vote or who's qualified to vote. And like I said the last time, while it is we normally would say that you have a right to vote, what you do have under our legislation is that you have a right to register to vote, right? So you must be 18 years or over. There are actually 4 criteria for voting. You must be 18 years or older. You must be Vincentian or a Commonwealth citizen. And that Commonwealth citizen, if you're such a person, you must be living in St. Vincent at least a year at the point of attempting to register. And for both of those categories of persons eligible to vote, you must have been living in that particular constituency, or you may call it a polling division, for at least 6 months. Now, I remember, I think the last election, there were discussions about, whether Nigerians were eligible to vote. And I think it also might be another hot issue. As I mentioned about being a Commonwealth citizen, for general education, there are about 52 Commonwealth countries. And that can be, it includes some African countries, not all of them. You have Asian, Pacific, Americas, Caribbean, of course, and Europe. So if any such person living in a Commonwealth country is living in St. Vincent for at least up to a year and wants to register to vote, once at the point in time you want to register to vote in St. Vincent and Grenadines, you have been living here for at least a year, and at the same time you've been living in the particular constituency for at least 6 months, you can register to vote. I also want to say there was something that came up last week in respect of what documents do you take with you when you're going to vote? And I revisit that because under the law or even the regulations, it doesn't specifically say anything but what documents. So you take your passport. If you have a passport, yes. But when you're registering to vote, you take your birth certificate as a Vincentian to show that you're a Vincentian. If you're a Commonwealth citizen, you will take with you the passport that shows that you belong to a Commonwealth country. And if you obviously might have changed your name, take a copy of that marriage certificate. If you're divorced, you take a copy of that absolute. Now, for practical purposes, and if you were to go, I will say to listeners, if you were to go on the electoral office website, it will say to you what documents you are to bring. And I know that last week someone said about, oh, won't you have to take something to show that you are living in that particular constituency? I also think for practical reasons, you may want to do so, because remember, at the same time, someone can object to you being registered to vote. And so if someone is objecting based on the fact that saying that you're not living in that particular constituency, then you may want to delay, you may want to stop any delay of your registration and say, well, I'm going fully prepared and I may take something with me that shows I live in this particular constituency. Now, I'm 18 years old. I'm at the community college. I don't even have a bill in my name or anything to show that I live in this particular constituency. So obviously, for constituencies where people know Daniel Vera or whomever it is, or the person, it may be easy for when you get there that somebody easily recognizes who's in the registration process. Yes, I know this person lives here. I would advise parents in the constituency to go with the 18-year-old to assist to register. Or even if you may say to vouch that I live in this constituency, I don't have anything on paper. You may say, well, where does the justice of the peace may take and say, I can certify that Daniel Vera lives in this constituency, or it is that a teacher who's there. And I believe as well, each political party is allowed to have scrutineers at the registration process. So whether it's ULP or NDP, someone may be able to go into vote to say, I know that this person lives here, whom the enumerator, the person who's registering persons can say, well, obviously I trust what this person is saying. But just to recap, there's nothing either on the electoral website saying that that is required, but I think for practicality, or for the sake of making sure that the Lord, I keep saying delay process, that the process is not delayed,
Right.
that you take something with you too, so that you live in that area.
Okay. And you were referencing constituencies. So, Doc, can you educate us on how you determine what constituency a voter resides in, specifically with those persons in the Southern Grenadines? Because you did mention them when you spoke about your meeting.
Yes. Well, the problem that we've been having, or the seeming confusion in the public, had to do with the pronouncement that was made by the supervisor of election. Zita pointed out just now that under the Section 5 of the RPA, you're entitled to register in a constituency that you've lived in for at least 6 months and 18 years and older, and so forth. But what does resided mean? And this is broken down, or at least it's given more detail in the regulations, that is to say the registration of electors regulation in sections 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And what they do is they explain that essentially the point is this: resided, you're physically there, but it says that it has to take into account all the facts of the case. And those facts of the case, one of which is physical residence, of course, but it's also the place that which has always been home. It's a place that he or she has adopted as a place of habitation, a place where his or her family is, unless living apart from the family, the place where he or she intends to return, when he or she goes abroad, a place where he or she sleeps. And a person may have more than one ordinary place of ordinary residence. And what it says is also that, of course, you can't, be qualified to vote in more than one constituency. Right. So if you have more than one ordinary residence, you will elect which one you want to do. But the point is that, according to the supervisory election, she was basically focusing on physical presence based on what was said in the RPA Section 5, in a constituency, so that even persons who were displaced let's look at the case specifically, from Union Island or any part of the Southern Grenadines, and they were displaced because of Hurricane Beryl, and then they had been living, say, in East St. George for 6 months or so, then she's saying that that person has to, is going to register for the first time, has to register in East St. George, even though the person had grown up in Union Island, had lived in Union Island, gone to school in Union Island, was only absent from Union Island because they have no home. Hurricane Beryl, much of the house, so they come and live here. So the important thing as well to note is that under the regulation, it says that temporary absence from your ordinary place of residence does not cause loss or change of place of residence. And clearly, if somebody is displaced because of a hurricane disaster and seeking shelter elsewhere, as soon as the house fixed, they're going back home. So this particular provision, of course, indicates that for persons who intend to go back home or in this place, that those persons should not be required to register outside of the Southern Grenadines and where they're living now in East or staying now in Eastern Georgia or Western Georgia, wherever, but that they should be facilitated to go back and register in the Southern Grenadines. I'll tell you that we raised this issue with the supervisor of election, and she indicated a willingness to say, well, I want to interpret the law and to do it correctly, but the previous opinion I've had said that essentially you have to interpret it in the way that she had, strictly to say physical presence in that constituency means that you have to register in Eastern Georgia. But we raised these issues, and she indicated that she would revisit it once we put it in writing and send it to her. So that's what we've done.
Okay, so I do want to take a quick question from someone who's watching our live. Raymond says, if a reputable person like a justice of peace vouched that someone was living in a particular constituency for the past 6 months, but you found out and have proof that they are lying, what would then be the outcome?
I can't say what would be the outcome.
Okay.
I can tell you what can be done. So if it is someone says that I'm living in this particular constituency, an objection can be raised, and that objection can be raised in writing, and you simply put that that objection simply. An objection simply means I object to this person registering, and I'm saying what my objection is. That has to be placed in writing and be submitted to the supervisor of elections. That is basically what you call an objection. So someone might say, I live here. Or let's just use, for instance, someone who's gone abroad and lived abroad for many years, might have been struck off, and because you remember you can't be living more than 5 years abroad, except where it is that you are a student. Okay. And so remember last week as well we talked about obviously you have to constantly be refreshing the register, the voters registration, and so where people have died, they must be removed. So if I have an objection that Zita Barnwell is registering to vote, and I know for a fact that Zita Barnwell has not been living here in St. Vincent for the last year, and Boas has not been living in this particular constituency for more than for the last 6 months, at least 6 months, the person can simply submit that to the supervisor of elections and let the supervisor of election know. Then obviously you have to say that going to court what my evidence is. Or if it is I'm vouching only, I can say, listen, maybe you can check the passport. I mean, there's so many ways in which the supervisor of election can go about to verify what someone puts on a form to say on form 1 to try to register to vote. But I will just simply say, submit your objection to the supervisor of election.
And anyone can object. Anyone from the community can object.
Yes, can object. Obviously, your objection will be looked at or examined and investigated.
But it ought to be.
Well, it ought to be, certainly.
Okay, Doc, you mentioned that in that same meeting you guys discussed, is it the design of the ballot boxes?
We're discussing this here, and it's a time when elections are supposed to be every 5 years. You exercise a democratic right, and people should look forward to the opportunity to do so. And there's a presumption that all the players would do things in accordance with law and so forth. But we saw, in the 2015 election, that there were problems with the way in which the process unfolded. At least was made to unfold. And so this is why we have to take care to ensure that those things that we see as potentially problematic, that we raise them and we have them addressed. This is not the first time I've done so. I did it prior to the last election when I had written to the Prime Minister and said, well, listen, we need to address these matters here about going into the election. No real response. And then we have, of course, we have now here the issues that we raised with the supervisory election. I spoke about the ballot paper in the 2015. In the election petition coming out of the 2015 election, that was one of the problems that you had with the ballots being torn improperly. Similar thing happened in the last election. A lot of the ballots were damaged, and you looked that the perforation line that is there on it was not clear. You could only really know it's there if you folded it in the perforation line. But in order to fold it in the perforation line, you have to know the perforation line is. So what we ask is basically that it be made more visible, so it would assist the presiding officer at the polling station, and whomever is actually folding it to tear it off, and to put it in its proper envelope, that is done properly. We spoke also about the voters list, the final voters list, because there was a problem where in the final voters list in some polling stations that you had, it seemed that the not everybody had the same list, and there are names that were not on the list that our agents had. So we raised this with the supervisor election. She said, of course, everybody will have the same list, must have the same list. But we're saying, ensure that we do have the same list. We know what the law requires, but we want to make sure that there's an understanding that this was observed, and so therefore don't dismiss it out of hand. Ensure that the list, that we all have the same list. And what we ask as well is that the list be made available in sufficient time so that we can examine it before, not we, I mean, in all the parties involved, the election, the political parties. And we got an indication from the supervisory election that yes, this is desirable, and that maybe a period of 3 days or 4 days prior to election we can get this the list, so that we can ensure that it is that they're all the same, and that it's complete. We spoke also, I said, about how agents, our agents inside the polling station, how they are located, because we have had complaints that the agents from our party in the polling station, they were seated in certain places that they couldn't see clearly what was happening, they couldn't hear what was going on, and they're being treated essentially as if they have no real place within the polling station to absorb. So we got a commitment as well from the supervisory election. Yeah, we agree that you must be able to see, you must be able to hear what is going on, and that all the parties who have observers there must be treated equally. So those are some of the concerns. Selection of the election workers, presiding officer, returning officer, poll clerks, and so forth. How is this done? We don't know. We just show up the election, then you go in the polling station, and there are people there. You don't know who they are. What you do observe is that most of them seem to be from the ULP, and that happens in my own constituency. So we asked the question, well, how is it that, in a situation where you have an independent office and so forth, that you could have this situation where persons, the predominance of persons who are known, these are not, secret, they're known to be ULP supporters, get these jobs in the polling station. What she said is essentially it's our responsibility. I asked whether this is advertised so that people could apply. She said no, it's just basically people know elections are coming up. They've done it in the past, they apply, and then they select whom they choose. There's no real transparency in the process as far as I'm concerned. But in any event, what we ask about that is that we can have greater transparency in the process of the selection of those candidates. There's another issue that was raised, and this has to do with whether persons who are involved as election officials, election officers, can engage in essentially campaigning on behalf of one party or another, which was observed, in previous election. And she said quite away that is a no-no. It should not happen. If we are aware of it happening, to let her know. Now when it passed, and those persons will no longer be working as election officials. So these are some of the things that we have raised, and there are other issues that we will continue to get rectified. But we want to make sure that this process, which really should not be complicated, you're exercising your constitutional right to vote, change your government, to elect a government. And then we have to be making sure that all of these things are in place. But we will do it because we understand, as we said from the outset, the importance of the electoral process, that the voters be properly informed as to what their rights are, how to exercise those rights, and that they know what choices they have to make. And that's why we're doing it both ways. We're educating here about the electoral process, and also when we go on the hustings on our radio programs and campaigns in the various constituencies and meetings, we tell people what the NDP is about, and hopefully persuade them that we are a party to vote for.
Just quickly, is there like a list of persons who are supposed to be stationed in the polling stations on election day, or that's kind of
Well, we have each of the political parties or candidates who have are on the ballot is entitled to have an agent inside the polling station to observe the voting process. And the idea of that is to, to have transparency in the election process. There are other officials that are selected by the supervisor of election, the presiding officer being the person in charge in each polling station. Of course, you have the returning officer who's in charge of the constituency overall. Have the poll clerk, have police officers, and when they had COVID, they had persons there who were sort of providing COVID assistance. I don't know what do you call them. Sanitize, hand sanitizer and stuff, and making sure that things were not contaminated. So there are some officials, but those are in the purview of the supervisor of election to select. I mean, the returning officer is technically appointed by the governor general, but the obviously the supervisor of election, all these officials, come through her, and so we want to make sure that those persons they're capable and that there's no perception that it's somehow that they are representing one party by a preponderance of one over the other.
Okay. And we would have touched briefly on the voters list. So Zita, can you tell us how often that list is published?
Right. So the supervisor of election, according to our legislation, must publish annual voters list or registered voters list. Now, and that basically there's several lists. So you have the annual list that is published. You also have what is called a quarterly list. And this basically is to update, like to say you have a master list. So voter registration is a continuing process. And so because it's a continuing process, legislation provides that the supervisor of election must so often update this list. So there's a quarterly list. That means every quarter a list must be published, and that has to be published no later than the 15th of the month when the quarter has finished, right? You also have to publish a supplementary list, and that supplementary list at some point, the supplementary list basically deals with those voters. You have to make sure you clean the list up ever so often. So after you do she publishes the quarterly list, there is a revised quarterly list, and that is a list that will then sort of weed out whether it is that the people might have transferred into the constituency. So you move from one constituency to another constituency. It does not include those who have transferred. So if I'm moving to South Central Windward, I would then be in South Central Windward, and that revised list would have removed me from, say, East Kingstown. So the list, yes, it is necessary that ever so often you must have a clean list. If people have died, it means that those persons as well must be removed from the list. If you are disqualified, because remember the last time we talked about how we can become disqualified. You can become disqualified if it is that you're mentally incapable, you're of unsound mind in a process, you're removed from the list, you're disqualified from voting. If you're serving now any sentence in the prison, any sentence whatsoever, we're not talking about those persons who have been locked up and on remand. Remember, you're innocent till proven guilty, because quite a bit of persons would be at the jail right in Kingstown, and those who are serving sentence usually are in Bel-Air. So any sentence that you're serving, you're disqualified from voting. Remember, also we did say that if you're serving a life, some death sentence, in a Commonwealth country, or if it is that you've been serving a sentence there of that does not exceed 12 months, then you will be disqualified from the list. So if as it's rolling over from time goes, every month, every quarter, you have to refresh that list. So there is the master copy, and obviously as you're going along, those will be added to that list. There is also a time what we call the special register and voter register. So once the governor general has given the writ of election, there is a period between which 15 days, isn't that right, Doug?
Yes.
Right. 15 days after that writ that you can do registration. And then 21 days after that writ has been given, supervisor of election has to compile any new voters. Now, it means that, remember, you have 15 days and 21 days. It means there's a little space in between there, 6 days.
Yes.
6 days within which supervisor of election must complete that list, that special registration list, voters of registration, Lord, register of voters list before the election. And I know from time to time, Dr. Friday may say that has always been a time of confusion. And most people.
Well, I'll tell you something, not to interrupt you, because I'm the alone sister.
No, I think, let me not say Dr. Friday says, I think generally speaking, you can understand. Within 6 days before election, the supervisor of elections office, who is also preparing for an election, is now dealing with another list
6 days. It's
of
But-
15 constituencies.
Well, look at it from the point of view as well of the political parties who have a role, a duty to ensure that if there are persons on the list, you can make objections even when they are on the
That's
list.
right.
so you can
But if
make
you have a
objection.
period where you have transfers taking place within that 15-day period leading up to election, which could be 21 days after it, it's a very short period of time. Sometimes it's 27, 28 days, up to 30 days, and so on when they call the election. But it does create a problem for double checking and making sure that that list is proper. And you've had previous supervisors of election have called for that period to be removed. Also, other observers from abroad have called for the removal of that period to prevent or to mitigate, to minimize the risk of any improper registration taking place during the period when proper checks of the list cannot be done. Because even though you have the 15-day period and you have 6 days and so on, supposedly that the election can be called, the supervisor of election sometimes may not have the list published in that time frame. And she's acknowledged that, it's maybe 3 or 4 days. We'll see if it's possible. But it's important that we have time to go through the list to make sure that everybody who is there is entitled to be there.
And in terms of making an objection, because we spoke about how persons can go about making an objection with constituency registration, how does a person go about then, because it's a small time frame, making an objection to someone on the list?
And I think that's what Dr. Friday is saying as well. Because if we were to follow and use the guidelines strictly, and we're talking about free and fair election, we're talking about transparency, we're talking about accountability. We want to ensure that that person says that I can vote in that constituency, that that person by law is registered, can register to vote in that constituency. You must be there for more than 6 months, And we also try to clarify, it slips me now because I think the last time I clarified next time. Yes, because I know we had raised the issue that if you were transferring out that the legislation says one thing, it said 3 months.
Right.
And then on the side, it was saying 6 months.
Yes.
And I know, I do apologize to our viewers because we did get the response and I cannot recall exactly what the response
I'm told that the
is.
3 months is what is applicable.
Okay.
It's
I don't
3.
know if that's the case, but we'll see.
That's
But
what
it's not.
the-
The interpretation is that 6 months is the period in which yet you have to register, to be able to transfer. That is the interpretation that the supervisor of election made.
Right, that's what it's
Okay.
that's what that's the interpretation she gave when we were at the
Yeah.
meeting.
Okay.
Okay,
So
there
that
is
is what-
something in
that's what-
writing
that's where
which
we're
we
going
can
by.
produce.
But here, also, just to cut you, not to cut you,
Right.
Sita, the challenge of getting the voters who have registered improperly, let's say, during that 15-day period, to be properly vetted and come off and so forth, it's a Herculean task. But the point that people have to understand is that even if after an election, it's found that people were improperly registered and that somebody who is not entitled to register, there are penalties for such actions. And so, they can be pursued even after an election. Of course, you want to make sure that everybody who's on the list, that those are all persons who are entitled to vote where they are registered to vote. And that will make it a totally in accordance with the law. And that's what we are seeking to do by the efforts we're taking here and by other efforts we take when we go out in the constituency and talk to people to let them know what our views are with respect to the electoral process.
Okay. So essentially, what makes up the voters list?
Right, so as I said before, there are three components to this. You'll have the register of voters, you'll have the supplementary register of voters, and you'll have the special electoral register. So there are three
Okay.
registers lists or registration lists that you compile and have one voters list, so to speak.
Okay.
And there's nothing really wrong with that, you know. Save and accept the difficulties that we have talked about with the special electoral registration. Remember, it's an ongoing process. And ever so often somebody turns 18, somebody dies, somebody, you know what I mean, somebody decides I want to vote, I've never voted, and I must be given a chance to exercise that right. And therefore, they must be given that chance to register.
Okay. I want to try to squeeze in some of the
Any
questions. We have one from Winston. He wanted to know if an idea of a time frame was given by the supervisor of elections to deal with some of the issues that were raised in the meeting.
Well, the issue relating to the registration of first registrants, persons who are registering for the first time, who have been displaced from the Southern Grenadines and are living elsewhere. The request was that we put our view of it, our opinion of it in writing, which we are in the process of finalizing now. And then she would seek clarification from the Attorney General's office. I would hope that that is already being sought, but because it's not dependent entirely upon, we've stated the problem, but in any event, we are complying with her request that we put it in writing because we believe that that's the proper interpretation. And that hopefully that will then be presented to the Attorney General as our view as to what the matter is. Because it's not a matter of favoring one or the other, it's just a matter of applying the law and interpreting it properly. You know, it doesn't make much sense to suggest that, you know, if somebody who is been displaced and has lived in Union Island or Canada all their life, that because they've been displaced in Hurricane Beryl, that they now must register in East St. George and vote for a candidate that they don't know. I mean, it's just simply not practical.
Okay. We have someone here trying to piece together this question. They are asking why or if the government has designated a specific building or area for those from the Southern Grenadines to vote.
Why have they?
Or if
they
they have designated a certain area.
Well, they have polling stations in the constituency. And in the Southern Grenadines, there have been locations that have been used multiple times, indicating same that you have done in every other constituency. And those will be set aside for voting. Once they have selected those locations, they will publish them prior to the election, so people will know where they are entitled to vote.
But
And they will
none
be
on the
voter list.
mainland?
Yeah?
I thought that
That's
Not on
what
the
I think they
mainland. Oh, you
mean.
mean
They
the-
mean
okay,
on the
vote on the mainland.
mainland.
No, what the supervisor of election said in the meeting is that persons who are registered to vote in the Southern Grenadines will vote in the Southern Grenadines.
Okay.
And so my question then was, what if those persons are still displaced and they have no place to live? What assistance would be provided by the Office of the Supervisor of Elections? And she said, well, essentially that was not a mandate that I should write to the government and get them to do it. So I invited her to join with me and write and say, in part of the exercise of the democratic process was for persons to be able to get back down on that day to cast their ballot, because they're required to do so in their constituency. But in any event, provisions will be made one way or another for persons to return to the Southern Grenadines to exercise their mandate, because that is their constitutional, that's their right as citizens of the country. And so we'll ensure that that happens.
Okay, and I hope that we can get confirmation on all of these things as soon as you get that information from the supervisor of elections. You get any sort of updates, I know that they're going to want to know, because the discussion on our
Well, I could understand, and they quite rightly, you know, that it shows that people, they are taking this process very seriously, and this is why we are doing this. And thanks to so much for expertise, and to you, Daniel, as well, for asking the pertinent questions. This is why we're taking this opportunity to bring this information to people. And this is information available to everybody, and it comes from us. It's not partisan information, it's an interpretation of the law. The other part about voting for NDP, of course, that's mine.
In closing, is there anything you would like to say about that?
No, what I would like to say is really, I think this is voting it's a constitutional right. Being involved in the election process is somebody's right to do, and so it should be facilitated. No one should obstruct or create problems, unnecessary hurdles in their way in doing so. And so we are doing this exercise here to help to move away some of the doubt, to create more confidence in people exercising their franchise, and so that when that day comes, they will go and vote fearlessly for the candidate of their choice. And we're hoping that, of course, that will be sooner rather than later, and that when the time comes, that everybody will be prepared and properly informed to exercise that mandate, and that we'll have free and fair elections in St. Vincent and Grenadines. That's the opening context of the letter that I wrote to the supervised election, that she has a duty to exercise her responsibilities in a way that facilitates the voting process to ensure it's free and fair. And we will do our part, because we're not naive, and we've been in this for a while, so we'll do our part to make sure that people understand what their rights are, what their obligations are, whether they choose to exercise it or not, and do what we can to facilitate it.
Okay. And thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Friday. Ziza, thanks for being with us again. We are looking forward to the next episode, and we want to say thanks to you as well. Remember, it is so important that you like and share this live, especially with your friends, your family, with anyone who may have concerns or would like to have any information on voting for the upcoming elections. Thank you for watching, and we hope you join us again on our next episode of NDP's Night Talks. Good night.
Well done.
Hey! We all in on this. Enough is enough.